Welcome to Bits About Books, the home for conversations with authors of breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. Founders, entrepreneurs, and individual professionals, we all need to keep track of ideas that are helping create our today and tomorrow. Bits About Books will strive to find those books and speak to their authors, go behind the scenes and understand what inspired the authors to write the books that they did and how they went about doing so. Through our conversations, we hope to gain insights that will help us to get the most out of our efforts. I'm your host Shubhanjan Sarkar, founder of PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform where our mission is to make buying easy. Welcome to Bits About Books. Thank you for your time and for joining us in this session. I have a favor to ask. While you continue to listen to the podcast, please leave a comment or rating at iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I personally look at each comment and will give you a shout out to each of you in our following episodes. It means a lot to hear from you. Our guest today is Dhruv Nath, and we speak with him about his brand new book, The Dream Founder.
The two most important things that co-founders must have: A, trust, and B, common vision. Everything else can be built or can follow. I would suggest one thing to people who are looking for co-founders, and I haven't found one. Your ideal option is somebody you already know, who has the similar kind of vision. Obviously, there has to be trust between them, but because you know the person, either there will be trust or there won't be. The ideal option actually is look at your college friends or maybe seniors, juniors, because that's a big catchment area, right? The other option is keep attending a lot of events, because physical events, you'll meet a lot of people, you'll find somebody you vibe well with, spend time with that person, and maybe he's the right guy. I have also suggested, very often it's a very common method used, take a senior employee who has complementary skills. So let's say you want a tech co-founder. Take a senior employee and try him out. But never add on a co-founder in a hurry. Because, in fact, I was hearing from somebody, it's very difficult to get rid of a co-founder. You can get a divorce, that's easier. But you can't get rid of a co-founder.
Dr. Dhruv Nath is a professor at MDI Gurgaon, a director with Lead Angels and an angel investor. Earlier, he was a senior vice president with NIIT Ltd. He has been a consultant to the top management of several organizations like Glaxo, Gillette, Nestle, Indian Oil Corporation, Thermax, and Bajaj Auto, as well as to the Prime Minister of Namibia and the Chief Minister of Delhi. Dhruv has a B.Tech in electrical engineering and a Ph.D. in computer science, both from IIT Delhi. He has written 5 books, the latest being The Dream Founder, the subject of our session today. Now, on to this episode on The Dream Founder with Dhruv Nath. Dhruv, welcome to Bits About Books. I'm delighted to have you back on the show. There are not many who write multiple books, by the way. Coming back on the show is not a very regular exercise. Okay, so welcome.
Thank you so much, and it's always great to be with you.
Why did you think that another book on startups had to be written? What really triggered you to write this book?
So, Shubhanjan, as we had discussed last time, I had earlier written this book, Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares, and I would like to emphasize and other nightmares.
Yes.
And this book went out in the market. I realized that there were a lot of issues which went way beyond funding. Okay. Fundraising is only one of the issues that a founder faces. So typically the founder will face things like, a lot of people have asked me, how do I get a co-founder? How do I know I've got the right co-founder? A lot of people ask me about, look, I have such a small startup, I don't have a brand, people don't want to join me. How do I get people to join me? How do I get people to join me and then stay? Then there are issues like, people talk about scalability. How do we make sure our business becomes scalable? How do we execute in a way that we are scalable, we are able to grow fast? And I think one of the most important issues, one of the most important questions which people have asked me over the past 2.5 years, specifically after 25th March 2020, is what the hell do I do in COVID, right? So it was very clear that funding was, while it was a very important issue, everybody needs money to be able to run your company, but there is a lot more beyond that. And that's where I started trying to put together problems that founders faced, and which is how this entire thing got together. And I called it the Dream Founder. That's it. I think you'll probably have, mine is Ulta. Yeah. So that's how it happened. And I've always felt like I've always been a writer. In fact, this is my fifth book. And it's always been good fun to write. And I believe if it is fun to write, it will be fun to read, and hopefully it will be useful as well.
Absolutely. So my question is, you are very deeply entrenched in the startup ecosystem in Delhi, and you are looking at a lot of firsthand. Firsthand you're looking at startups, their challenges, what they're looking for, etc. So when you said that, okay, I need to sort of expand the horizon beyond funding, and I need to give a more holistic, for the lack of a better word, approach to the startup idea, what did you do next? How did the book take shape?
Okay, so it followed more or less the same path that my earlier book, Funding of Startup, took, which is step one, I just tried to figure out what the issues are that people want to understand, right? And clearly they emerged. Marketing was one very major issue. People was a very major issue, starting with your co-founder. Attitude of the founder became a huge issue. And these are things which I learned because for the past 10, 12 odd years, I've been dealing with founders. In fact, a lot of this also came up because before I became a professor and later an angel investor, I spent about 20 years in the IT industry where a lot of people issues came up. So some of that also went into this. So step one was to identify those issues which actually trouble founders and which founders need to focus on. Step two was, I've always believed, you need something simple that you can understand and remember, because then you'll be able to apply it. So in the first book, I had something called the persistent framework for a business. Here I kept trying to figure out an appropriate framework, and I came up with Dream Founder. So Dream is actually an acronym. So D stands for Dream Big, R stands for Right Team, E stands for Execution, A is for Attitude, and M for Make Opportunities Out of Crisis, which really got triggered by the COVID crisis. So that was the second step. Third step was, having created this, because this seemed to be just what I wanted, then I started scouting around for people who either fitted into this framework as a dream founder or did not fit in, and therefore they become failure stories. And so I started gathering these things. And fortunately, I was able to get enough both successes as well as failures. And finally, I said, look, these are all young startups. These are startups within, let's say, 1, 2, 3, maximum 4 years of starting. Let me now try and talk to some of the real biggies. The Zomatos of the world, and the Naukris of the world, and the Make My Trips of the world, and of course Meena Ganesh. So which is why I went to these really successful guys, and that topped up everything. So on the one hand, therefore, I had stories about people who either were dream founders or were not, and two, I had a lot of gyan from these big guys. So that's really the process I followed.
Just to quickly touch upon, how have you accommodated the non-dream founders? Are they separate chapters of their own, or are those stories woven into the success stories?
Yeah, no. In fact, every chapter that I have is about one startup. Most chapters. There are some chapters which are more generic. For example, the chapter on attitude covers many startups, but most of them will have one startup. So each failure case has been one chapter, right? And I'll just take a very simple example. There was one person, and by the way, in each failure case, I have been very careful to hide the name of both the founder as well as the company, because it's not fair, to make it available to the public. So there was one example of a person who said he had come from a corporate background, and he says one of the problems we face is that feedback from junior levels, feedback from the grassroots rarely reaches the top. And the top therefore sits in their ivory tower and makes their decision, but they never get this feedback, right? So he says, look, I will create a piece of software where anybody, so it's like a suggestion box, anybody can make a complaint or give feedback and also give suggestions, right? But it actually goes beyond a suggestion box because it creates a thread. So if you give feedback and there are 3 other people who say, oh wow, great idea, I will support it, then in software the top management figures out which kinds of suggestions have the maximum support, and therefore they can focus on them rather than focusing on 2000 of these. So he had actually come to us for funding. Fundamental question which we asked him was, look boss, you've done this, but what's your entry barrier? And he says, look, I've created this piece of software. It will take people time to create it. I fortunately have a software background. And I said, look, as a simple version, it will probably take maybe 2 programmers 2 months to create this. So what is to prevent your client from saying, I will not use this, why the hell should I pay money for it? I will simply quickly create this internally. And he need not have all the frills and fancies and so on. It may take just 2 months, right? There was no answer. So, the point is, this was a clear example where he was solving a problem, but there was no entry barrier, right? And this therefore formed the separate chapter. Similarly, I have a few other guys who, have formed chapters on their own. Because I think, personally, if you ask me, and I think that's probably true, you can perhaps learn far more from failures than you can from successes. And ideally, you should learn from somebody else's failure rather than you failing, right? So there is a lot of focus on failures.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I was just about to say that there is a case for destigmatizing failure,
yes,
and celebrating it. Because in India, if we, in your dedication you wrote to the startup capital of the world,
correct,
if we want to be there actually and be there, we have to change our attitude as a nation to failures.
Yeah. So I would just add to that, Shubhanjan, being a failure or failing in doing something is not a problem in itself. The key issue is as long as you learn from it. If you don't learn from it and you keep making the same mistake again and again, then God help you. And I don't think even God would want to help.
Of course, I agree totally.
So I think the learning is critical.
Right. So again, coming back to the structure of the book. So because you arrived at DREAM as your acronym, so to say, or a framework,
right,
your book actually followed that structure.
That's right. That's almost. Yes, you're right.
Okay. So okay, that makes sense to me now. I mean, I understand why it is structured the way it is structured.
Correct. Except for one thing, the A for attitude I brought in very early because that's a common theme across all successful startups. See, one of the things I have multiple things in attitude, and incidentally, a lot of what I've learned about attitude is from one of my mentors today, which is Sanjeev Bikhchandani Naukri. Phenomenal learning. And the other person I've learned it from is my ex-boss when I was working in NIIT, which is R.S. Pawar. The right attitude, right? So I'll just give you a quick story. So, and this, by the way, is from the book. There was a very well-known branch manager of a big shot FMCG company, and he had one young management trainee from one of the IIMs who joined him, right? So I won't name them, but I've taken fictitious names in the book. So this branch manager, when the management trainee joined him, he said, look, you go to the store, there are a lot of posters, and these are posters about our products. And then you pick up a bucket of glue, and then you go around town and keep pasting these posters on the walls. So the guy from the IIM was, I mean, he was horrified. He says, "Look, I am an MBA and that too from the IIM. Come on, yeah, this is not my job." So that guy tried to convince him. He says, "No, this is not my job. An office boy would do it, maybe far better than I could." So the branch manager said, "Okay, no problem." So he gave him something else. He said, "Look, you go to our various Kirana stores and take feedback and try and sell them more stocks." He says, "Oh, that's okay. That's fine. For my background, that's fine." So this young management trainee went to these Kirana shops, and every Kirana shop he went to, he saw some distance away behind him, there was some person who was putting up posters. Okay. And every time this guy moved ahead, that guy would follow him and again put up posters. So finally, after the fourth or fifth shop, this guy got curious, who is this? So he went to meet him, and it turned out to be the branch manager. So this guy, the management trainee, apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, sir. I will not say no again." Took the bucket from him, took the posters and started putting it up. Now, I think the message is very, 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 very important. The message is, number one, no job is below my dignity. Right? And I think that's a message everybody has to. A lot of founders will go into their ivory tower and do strategizing and so on and, high level sales. I just recently discovered that once in a quarter, Dipinder Goyal of Zomato actually puts on a red t-shirt and does deliveries, right, in Gurgaon. And I think that's wonderful because you understand the pulse of what's happening at the ground level, right? So if I go back to this IIM guy, tomorrow he would have a team of maybe office boys or whatever under him who would have to go and put up posters. Now, he had to train them. He would have to tell them, "Look, don't put them too close together, otherwise you're wasting them. Don't put them so far apart that by the time you come to the second poster, the guy has forgotten the brand. Don't put them in a place where it is surrounded by your competition, because then nobody will notice you," right? Things like this. So you can do that only if you've done it yourself and face the music. And I think that's a very, very important thing. So I would summarize it in the following way. No job is below my dignity. Everything is my responsibility. Yes, I cannot do everything because then that's physically impossible, but I must be willing to do everything. So I think that's a key part of attitude, and that's why I said attitude I brought in right in the beginning in the first section. And then, from time to time, we have multiple startups who show this kind of attitude.
Right. This is a great point to actually dive into the book, and let's sort of follow your path. So you start by the story of InstaMojo.
Right.
What made you choose their story?
So in the back of my mind, what I had was dream. You should have gone through a crisis, at least one crisis. You should be dreaming big. You should have done certain unique things in terms of execution. You should have had innovative methods of marketing, and you have the right attitude, right? So I had that background in mind when I started choosing people. Now this guy, sorry, I forget his name for a minute, Akash Gehani. He was actually a student of mine from MDI, although I didn't remember him. Okay. This guy, they dreamt really big. They said, "Look, we ultimately want to be providers of whatever any small business online wants. We are focusing on largely online businesses. We are a one-stop shop for everything they want across the country." Now that's a huge opportunity, huge dream, right? So dream big. Then if you come to things like the right team, right? There were two things they did. One is they had three co-founders, right? So there were three of them. And the good thing is that these guys had complementary skills. So one had a tech background, One, was very good at strategy. One was great at implementing operations. So, ideal. And they trusted each other. They knew each other. They trusted each other, which is very, very important. But at the same time, they didn't blindly agree with each other. So they would have huge fights. But the vision was common. Vision was common. We want, we want to be able to provide everything. We should be the primary provider to any online business, any small online business. They're not talking of Reliance Jio or Amazon and so on. So right team. Of course, then we also got into how they were recruiting people and looking after them, but basically starting with the co-founders. Then you look at things like attitude, right? They were very, very clear, very, very clear. Whatever my customer wants, I will provide. So for example, they, they had a lot of people who were doing online tutorial classes. Okay, no problem. They had people who were doing, online consulting. They would come through these guys and they would make payments available through InstaMojo. But they also had some ladies who were baking cakes at home, and those cakes had to be delivered. So they said, look, our approach is for the customer, anything he wants, as long as that's a large enough segment, we will take care. So they actually tied up with logistics partners and delivery started happening. Okay. So deliveries, meaning it is not just that we will accept payments, we will help you to do deliveries as well, right? So that was the portion about attitude. Then, if you look at execution, one very, very important issue is marketing, right? They had a very phenomenal business model. See, how they started was, my customer is a small online business, right? And they have customers who will buy their products, and I will basically help the my customer, which is the small business, to collect money from his customer. Okay, that was their starting point. Now look at the way they grew. This guy, the customer of theirs would have maybe 500 other customers, many of whom would themselves be small businesses, okay, or small businessmen. So suddenly they found this is a great way to collect payment, and I'm talking of about 8 years back, 7, 8 years back, right? That time you didn't have too many payment opportunities. So without having to spend at all, purely through a good experience of the customer's customer, they had guys joining them. That's a phenomenal thing which I thought people should learn about, because that's how you really get referrals, right? And of course the last bit was making opportunities out of crisis. And they had a major crisis somewhere, not during COVID, but before COVID. For whatever reason, they were not able to raise funding. And they said, look, we have to tighten our belts. We have to become sustainable. So they actually cut costs dramatically and tightened their belts, and they became profitable. And after that, suddenly investors started taking interest, right? So they actually used the crisis of no money, and therefore we become far more sustainable to become attractive to investors in the future. So it's been a great story, and I think the reason why I picked it, one of course is he's my student, but the other bigger reason is he fitted in and ticked all these 5 boxes.
Basically, even making the most out of crisis also sort of tunes in with attitude, right?
Absolutely. So these are all linked. You're absolutely right. So I'll give you an example. When COVID happened, because that is probably the biggest crisis that hit anybody in the last maybe century, maybe apart from the world wars. When COVID happened, you had broadly 2 kinds of founders. There were some founders who would say, Mar gaya. Okay, I will only watch Netflix or I'll play video games and I'll curse the hell out of the Wuhan virus. But there were those founders who say, no, I'm going to fight. And that fighting spirit is a very, very large part of attitude. I would say that's a key part, and I would call it perseverance, or, being persistent, or just hang in there, keep on and on at it, and you'll figure out a way to. So there are many other guys who've been able to come out of crisis, and You're right. It all comes back to attitude.
It's time for a short break. Stay with us. After the break,
See, I have been a mentor. I've invested in about 15 odd startups, and I've been a mentor to well over 100, maybe a couple of hundred. And I saw in a lot of cases, there were some cases where there was one founder and he was going absolutely bonkers. When you have to raise money, that's a full-time job. How do you run your business and raise the money at the same time? It's a real crisis. He couldn't do justice to either, right? On the other hand, I've also seen startups where they had 5 co-founders. Okay, major issue. Why? Because first of all, there are 5 fixed salaries to be paid every month, right? Number 2, many of these people had overlapping skills.
You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end.
welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for Bits About Books and founder of PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. Let's dive right back into the episode where we left it. Nothing can reduce the importance of getting a good team going.
Sure.
You also advocate that one should not be a single founder. One should have co-founders. Tell a bit about how that segment got the structure that you provided.
See, I have been a mentor. I've invested in about 15 odd startups, and I've been a mentor to well over 100, maybe a couple of hundred. And I saw in a lot of cases, there were some cases where there was one founder and he was going absolutely bonkers. When you have to raise money, that's a full-time job. How do you run your business and raise the money at the same time? It's a real crisis. He couldn't do justice to either, right? On the other hand, I've also seen startups, and there was one startup which appeared in my first book where they had 5 co-founders. Okay, major issue. Why? Because first of all, there are 5 fixed salaries to be paid every month, right? Number 2, many of these people had overlapping skills. So I think there were 2 tech guys. Now one of them had to head tech, but you had 2 guys, what do you do? So it's an overkill. And gradually they started fighting amongst each other, and finally 2 people left and it came down to 3. So I've actually seen this happening, which is where I picked it up from. I said, look, the number of co-founders is very important. 2 or 3 is ideal. Less than 2 is not a good idea. And obviously more than 4, let's say, is definitely not great, right? And then what also emerged was, where I talked about the fact that these people had overlapping skills. It's very important to have complementary skills. If you're a marketing guy, then you have to have another guy who has a tech background. If you have a tech company, right? You have to have somebody who understands finance or somebody who understands operations, right? So complementary skills are required. Vision has to be common. Very, very important. Otherwise, you'll keep fighting every day. So I think all this came up from the failures that I have seen, where I've seen founders bickering amongst each other, where, sometimes I have had peculiar situations where the 2 founders met me independently. Hey boss, what do I do? I realized, look, this is a common problem, so therefore it goes into my book. So that's really how it happened. I think this came more out of failures.
You mentioned to me before we start, at the beginning of this chat, that founders keep asking you, how do I find a co-founder and how do I know that that co-founder is the right co-founder? What does the book, what prescription does the book provide on that one?
So first of all, there is no prescription, there are only thoughts. Many of these things, it's a hit and trial, right? And I have just given some ideas. So first of all, I think the two most important things that co-founders must have: A, trust, and B, common vision. Everything else can be built or can follow, right? You don't have a common vision. There is one guy, for example, I have one story about two co-founders. I think they were called, if I remember right, Akela and Dukela, if I remember right. So one of them had huge ambitions. He said, "Look, we have started in Kanpur," and I think they were offering urban company kind of services. I've started in Kanpur, but we must expand to multiple towns. We'll have to cover the whole of Uttar Pradesh and finally go beyond that. And for which we'll raise funding, and obviously we'll make a loss because we are putting everything into growing. And the other guy was very highly conservative. Government, parents who had worked in government jobs. No, boss, it has to be sustainable. If it means we grow slowly, we grow slowly. Let's stick to one town first. This is one example, and they finally had to split because the vision was not common, right? Trust is obviously very, very important. I would suggest one thing to people who are looking for co-founders, and I haven't found one. Your ideal option is somebody you already know, who has the similar kind of vision. Obviously, there has to be trust between them, but because you know the person, either there will be trust or there won't be. And if there won't be trust, then you will not take that person on as a co-founder anyway. The ideal option actually is look at your college friends or maybe seniors, juniors, because that's a big catchment area, right? The other option is keep attending a lot of events, because physical events, you'll meet a lot of people, you'll find somebody you vibe well with, spend time with that person, and maybe he's the right guy. I have also suggested, very often it's a very common method used, take a senior employee who has complementary skills. So let's say you want a tech co-founder. Take a senior employee and try him out. And give him some ESOPs. If you find him good and you find, vision is common, etc., etc., increase the ESOPs to a significant amount so he becomes a co-founder. But never add on a co-founder in a hurry. Because, in fact, I was hearing from somebody, it's very difficult to get rid of a co-founder. You can get a divorce, that's easier, but you can't get rid of a co-founder.
Absolutely. The book moves on to execution after that, and which I guess is the crux of any startup success. I think you can, with great team, great idea, great opportunity, if there is no execution, there is no startup, right? I mean, what is it that makes some teams good in execution and some teams not?
I think Shubhanjan, here I don't know if I can identify any one or two factors, because execution is something which will vary. See, marketing, a lot of it would be common. Attitude is common, right? Dream big is common. Execution is something which varies so dramatically from business to business that I don't think they can be a common theme. But maybe what I'll do is I'll share with you a couple of examples, right? Again from the book. So there is one very interesting story about a company called iDream. These guys, what they were doing was they were into digital learning. Look at Byju's. Byju's is into all learning of all subjects for school children. And you either do it online or you buy a tablet from Byju's and you learn whatever subjects you want. And Byju's has been very, very successful. It's a mammoth today, right? But these guys, what they realized was, if you look at the lower strata of society, A, they can't afford Byju's. And B, in any case, for example, you look at government schools or you look at village schools. I have been to several village schools, by the way. And in many cases, you don't have teachers, you don't have seats, you don't have electricity for much of the day. Internet at best is patchy, and these poor kids are hardly learning. So what they have done is they have actually created a package where they have digital content. So English, Hindi, other languages as well. and science, right? Biology, physics, chemistry. All this content has been made available on in digital format, and they supply this to schools, to affordable schools, and it's in vernacular, except English, obviously. Now, here is where execution becomes extremely critical. So I had been with these guys to a place in a village school in Bhiwadi, which is a very small town in Rajasthan, and it's actually a village beyond Bhiwadi. And the roads there are terrible. So fortunately, I had taken a taxi. I hadn't taken my car. Therefore, and I was very lucky because I mean the way it went, the axle would probably not have survived. So when I reached there, I actually saw their solution. They told me three things. They said, look, execution is the biggest problem we have faced. Why? Number one, there is no internet, or if at all it is there, it is very, very sporadic, right? So how do you do online learning? So they said, okay, we have low cost tablets, and we have onboarded, or so not onboarded, already preloaded all the software on the tablet. So no internet connection required. Okay, wonderful. That's one. Second, they said electricity is off and on, right? Village schools, obviously, sometimes you'll have it, sometimes you won't. So how do these tablets get charged? So what they had done was they had created one cabinet, some kind of cabinet, where after class, the students would put in their tablets. And those tablets, when you insert it, it automatically gets connected to a connector. It inserts in a connector, and that is connected to the electric supply. So even if you get 2 hours of supply anytime in 24 hours, it could be midnight, it could be whatever, the tablets get charged, right? So they took care of this problem where charging was an issue, because you never know when the electricity would come. Third issue, you know, many of these government schools, see, there is the government's program, which is your CSR program, right, where corporates are told to spend part of your profits, I think 2% of your profits, on socially relevant projects. And village education is one of them. Healthcare would be one more, and so on. So a lot of these corporates, they had actually donated computers, right, to these village schools. But the problem is, if your village school is way in the wilds, who's going to maintain it? So when the keyboard conks out, or the power supply conks out, who's going to maintain it, right? Nobody can. Because, I mean, for the maintenance engineer, it is a full day trip to one village school. So the maintenance wasn't happening, it was just lying there, unused. What these guys did was, because it was tablets, low cost and easy to carry around, it's like an iPad, a cheaper version of an iPad. So every time somebody went to these village schools from iDream, they would go for the regular visits, monitoring and so on and so forth, and helping the teachers. They would carry spare tablets. 2 tablets down, no problem, I'll replace them, bring them back, and they'll get repaired, or software will be reloaded in at my head office. So, you know, all these things, I thought this was a phenomenal example of great execution in a very tough environment. You know, where you don't have electricity, you don't have the internet, you can't have people going for maintenance. They've solved everything. So I must tell you that I have actually set up one such. It's called a tab lab, by the way, tablet-based lab. I have set up one such tab lab in my hometown, which is Shimla, and one government school, girls' school, and those kids have a whale of a time. They keep learning, and there's no maintenance issue, there's no internet issue, there's no electricity issue. So I think execution, again, there is no formula, but these guys, okay, so let me put it like this. For execution, you have to understand what's happening on the ground. What are the problems on the ground? What are the issues you're likely to face? Keep your ear to the ground. That's the only way you'll get execution right.
And where does investors fit into all this?
Okay, so so first of all, investors look for dream founders. Very simple, right? One of the top things that I would say the first thing, the most important thing the investor looks for is who is the founder, right? And all these things fall into place, right? Does he have his ear to the ground? Does he have the right attitude? Does he dream big, etc., etc.? Many of these startups which I've spoken about have been getting repeated rounds of funding. Okay. So for example, maybe I'll share one more story. I think the last story, which you would not have read so far, is a story about a company called Planet Spark. Very interesting story, and probably the highlight of this book, which is why it's at the end. So these are two very bright young guys, and they had created a digitized, organized series of tuition centers. So for teaching maths and English. Because normally in a tuition center, what happens is, you're sitting at the dining table of the tuition teacher, and the pressure cooker the whistle would blow, and somebody would phone up, and all kinds of interruptions, right? So they said, we will organize it. So they actually tied up with Oyo rooms, and they took very good rooms in residential areas, and they had a mentor, and they had digital content on laptops. So very good. COVID hit them. So by the way, they got investments. They got 2 rounds of funding, and I'm from Lead Angels, so we had also invested in the second round. So I had also personally invested. I think these guys are one of the best examples I've seen of, the last part of the dream founder, which is making opportunities out of crisis. Crisis hit them, COVID. Ab COVID mein, what happens? Nobody goes out. Right? There's a lockdown. Even after the lockdown, no parent will send their child to a school. So forget the tuition center. Don't send it to a school. I mean, why would he come to a tuition center? So everything stopped. The business completely stopped. Correct? Now what these guys did was they said, okay, we have a lot of content. So let us offer that content on the internet. And the mentor will also be available on the internet. Wonderful. Good pivot. The problem is they were now competing with guys like Byju's. You can't compete with Mammoth, right? Byju's is the king of the jungle. So it didn't work. So they kept persevering. I keep talking about attitude. Keep persevering, which is exactly what you also said. So they said, look, let's try extracurricular stuff. So they tried drawing, painting, they tried dance, they tried dramatics, they tried, not dramatics, they tried robotics. They tried music, singing. Nothing really caught on. Then I think their 7th or 8th thing that they tried was, if you look at a typical parent, the parent wants 2 things. The child during the education, during the time that the child is in school. One is the child should get good marks. They should be good learning, and therefore, ultimately graduate into a good college. And 2 is, the child has to be able to face the world. So the child should be confident in speaking, the child should be able to face a crowd and speak, right? And these guys suddenly hit upon this whole idea of public speaking for children. Okay, there was nobody else. There were some small unorganized guys, but these guys were funded. They had a brand, they had built up a brand, and they said, okay, now we will do public speaking for children. Today, they have grown phenomenally. And you asked about investors. They have had 4 rounds of funding. And the last round of funding, which is about a year back, was at 75 times the first round. Even before this, they had 1 more round, but I'll ignore that. So actually, they went up 150 times. But even from the first Angel Network round, which is, I think, Indian Angel Network, they went up 75 times, right? So, people who have the right attitude, people who keep pivoting, keep persevering, investors are delighted, and investors are just chasing them. So I would say, if you're a dream founder and if you follow the kind of things that we keep talking about, there is money available. Investors are very happy to invest.
Bits About Books is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink makes buying easy by enabling high-quality engagement between buyers and sellers through its presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create customized sales narratives using sales collaterals and personal videos and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversations. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 99021 631 32.
Dhruv, this was a delightful discussion, and I think people who end up reading your book will benefit greatly from listening to you on this one. There's a lot in there, and I hope it is as big a success as your last one.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great talking to you.
We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes with great conversations on breakthrough books. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening. Thank you for being with us today on Bits About Books, where we talk to authors about breakthrough books on sales, marketing, and business. We hope this conversation helped inform and motivate as we all navigate a rapidly changing business environment. For us, these are enlightening conversations enriched with knowledge and expertise. We encourage you to go out and buy the book to learn firsthand and implement some of the great ideas we discussed today. We hope to have you with us again in the next exciting episode of Bits About Books. If you liked what you heard, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast platforms like iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast from, and give us a rating while you are at it.
This Bizcast original podcast is produced for PitchLink, the next generation buyer-seller engagement platform, where the mission is to make buying easy. Hosted by Subhanjan Sarkar and produced by Rajiv Aditya. See you next time and have a wonderful day.